Before we get going today, Eric and I would like to invite you all to take part in our very first question and answer session. We are going to sit down, answer your questions about aging, biology, research, translational medicine, whatever you can think of. Visit buckinstitute.org/podcast and send us in your most difficult questions, then tune in for the answers on an upcoming episode. Now, let's get on with the show. This episode is presented by Ashton Thomas Private Wealth, guiding families and institutions with clarity today and strength that endures for generations.
There has always been such a passion for being young longer, but there's a lot of snake oil out there. When it comes to muscle, now instead of it just being not scientifically proven, here are scientifically proven approaches. I actually think now we're just giving that a whole new level.
Aging is evolving. No longer are we subject to forces beyond our understanding and control. We have charted the landscape and explored the frontiers of aging.
What was science fiction is close to becoming reality, restoring sight, repairing tissues, reviving cells, organs, and maybe even our minds.
I'm Eric Verdin, CEO of the Buck Institute.
And I'm Brianna Stubbs, a scientist here at the Buck.
On this podcast, we dive deep into geroscience, studying the intersection of aging and disease with some of the brightest scientific stars on the planet.
Join us because
we're not getting any younger, yet.
Eric, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm actually super excited to discuss with you my podcast interview I did a few weeks back with Hanadie Yousef, who at the time was the CEO of Juvena, but actually since we recorded the interview at the big JP Morgan health conference that happened in early 2026 in San Francisco, Juvena announced a $35 million raise, and also that Dr. Yousef would be moving away from being CEO to being a board director and executive advisor, which I think super exciting for her. But it's fun that she and I spoke right before that announcement happened, so it sort of puts the conversation in a different light.
Fantastic. So that's a pretty big raise in our field. What was this all about?
So Juvena have a partnership with Eli Lilly. They're focusing on developing drugs for muscle wasting and muscle regeneration. And I think it's super timely, what with GLP-1 drugs putting muscle mass at threat. So she and I have a really interesting conversation about how important muscle is for aging and how they use AI and also the cellular secretome. So all of the stuff that cells release in order to look for drugs that can be used to target muscle health and aging. So it's a super fascinating interview, made all the more pertinent by this big announcement, I think, that Juvena just made. So I hope you enjoy the conversation.
This is a really crucial area of aging research, the whole idea of sarcopenia, whether it occurs as a function of aging or as occurs as a function of some of the medicines, as you mentioned, GLP agonists. I think a lot of effort in the field in trying to understand this. So I'm really excited to listen to this.
Thank you very much for taking time to join us today. So, aging is exploding, AI is exploding, and you're kind of sitting at the intersection of all of those things. So for you, what do you think is the most exciting thing that you're working on in the longevity space right now?
At Juvena, we've been at this for the last 8 years, where we are so passionate about unraveling the complexity of secretomes, in particular proteins secreted by human stem cells, and really identifying and leveraging the latest in quantitative proteomics and AI to actually map those proteins, sometimes thousands of understudied or not really well understood proteins, to different tissues in which they're exhibiting their natural capacity to promote tissue regeneration and repair. So we're building this map of regenerative protein biology, oftentimes finding proteins that can really target homeostatic mechanisms involved in tissue health and regeneration that are actually dysregulated during aging. And so for us, we think we're at the cusp of some, really kind of revolutionary ways in which we can actually establish medicines that promote longer health span, extend health span, and ultimately also reverse a lot of the hallmarks of aging and unhealthy aging to keep people healthier, to help them live their lives to the fullest for as long as possible, to create so many more centenarians, right? And give everyone that opportunity to actually get into those older decades of life, living life to the fullest.
How long would you like to live yourself?
Ultimately for me, I would actually love to live as long as possible, so long as I, have my mental acuity, right? My ability to move. I love running. I love, hiking. I love exercise. I love games. I love traveling, right? So, as long as I'm able to kind of have those capacities and not live in pain, I wouldn't mind living until I was 200, right? Maybe even longer. But the unfortunate reality for human beings today is that so many of us will enter even like starting it from our 40s, right? And my dad and a lot of my family members are kind of examples of that, right? You get into these later decades, and while you have that capacity and zest for life, your body's just not keeping up with you, right? You start getting things like diabetes, metabolic impairments, heart disease, cardiovascular, neurological, strokes, cancer. And so, ultimately, I think, I care more about, helping my loved ones than even myself, right? But it's really making sure that those around me and humanity really has that chance to make a huge impact. And I feel like we're actually at that cusp with the latest, technological advancements, tools like AI, as well as our understanding of the biology of aging.
Let's go into that a little bit more. You mentioned you've been working on Juvena for 8 years. Tell me a bit about how it started. Where was the field then? What has been the biggest kind of like growth areas in the last 8 years?
Great questions, Brianna. I'd say first, what got me into it, this was actually in my early 20s. I'm 38 now, so we're talking like when I was like 21 and, just started my PhD at Berkeley. I just feel so lucky and fortunate that I, coincidentally met Irina Conboy and Mike Conboy and decided to take their class in bioengineering called Stem Cells and Directed Organogenesis, where it was really then that I just fell in love with the concept that, and realization for the first time ever, that not only are we unraveling and understanding more and more the mechanisms underlying the biology of aging and why our tissues decline in function, in particular our own body stem cells as we age, but we can actually target a lot of those mechanisms and pathways to reverse the process, promote tissue regeneration, repair, really from that regenerative angle. And as well as just, oh my gosh, like we can actually tackle the largest unmet medical needs and potentially avert a potential future catastrophe, given that we have an aging global population where more and more people are living with multiple comorbidities that are also costing, the economy a fortune to manage. And the current, sick care system is just not going to keep up with what we really need, which is a true healthcare system. So that's what got me into it. I'd say then in the last 8 years since, then I went through 10 years of a PhD at Berkeley, a postdoc at Stanford, kept unraveling a lot of, discoveries, which we can talk about. But once, we launched Juvena over the last 8 years, what I've seen is, first, it was so exciting, this idea of how can we leverage these also technological revolutions that have been happening in AI, from, the deep, neural networks we're using to, more recently, generative AI techniques that's just so rapidly, I feel like, transforming. How could we actually apply that to improving one of the most costly, industries out there, right? Which is the cost of drug discovery and development, and just the sheer amount of, failures and billions of dollars, unfortunately, that are spent on really exciting ideas that don't make it through sort of clinical development or ultimately lead to benefits when being tested in people. We're starting to get this idea and excitement around longevity.
There's so much talk about how AI can get us to drugs faster. And you talked about, neural networks and machine learning, all of those things. Can you, for, a smart layperson, explain for us how it works in drug development and how it's speeding things up?
Yeah, sure. The way that we really leverage that at Juvena is really we look at AI and machine learning as a toolkit, right? A toolkit where we can integrate different types of algorithms, models, and tools to help every stage of the process. From the in silico library that we built by leveraging quantitative proteomics and looking at different types of regenerative and non-regenerative secretomes to identify a library of over 2,000 proteins that are enriched for therapeutic potential, through to the large language models that are, being leveraged, and different types of models for in silico rank ordering, and actually taking so much multi-omics data and information and features of these proteins to use as data points to actually predict and map which proteins might be working for different tissue types, through to then different types of deep learning models that we use where we, can train them so that they can help predict measurements or just measurements, really much more efficiently and in an unbiased way from, let's say, animal behavior, experimental models.
So you mentioned when you were introducing Juvena a little at the start, the Secretome. So what is a Secretome and why is it interesting?
Our kind of thinking around the Secretome actually did stem from early work that I began doing as a second-year graduate student at UC Berkeley with Irina and Mike Conboy. Once I co-joined their labs in the lab of Dave Schaefer as an NSF graduate fellow, where I was really ultimately interested in measuring changes in protein signaling that occur systemically in blood circulation, as well as locally in tissue microenvironments, such as muscle and brain in particular, that led to a loss of what's known as tissue homeostasis and the onset of degenerative symptoms that ultimately manifest as debilitating diseases such as sarcopenia or dementia or neurodegenerative diseases, and showing that we can actually modulate those protein signal and transduction cascades to send the right types of protein signals to stem cells in our body to actually instruct them to repair, regenerate, restore homeostasis, to really improve that tissue restoration and function. Ultimately, we were leveraging aged animals as a model, right? Aged mice, where mice that are, for example, 2 years old are like folks in their 60s, 70s. The older the mice get, the more they also start, just like people, to get symptoms associated with cognitive decline, as well as and decline of things like hippocampal neurogenesis, new neuron formation, as well as increase in inflammation, activation of immune cells such as microglia in the brain, or macrophage activation systemically. And you also get muscle wasting and loss of muscle regeneration. So if you get injured when you're older in mice, just like in people, you get more fibrosis in an acute injury setting. You also just get that decline of lean mass and decline of things like grip strength, walking speed test, or in cognitive, tests, in the brain, like, the Barnes, or test, or other sort of, tests that will test sort of hippocampal based memory formation and cognitive function. And so in these models, there was clearly an age-related decline, where then we, on the one hand, I had projects and I've published multiple papers that show that we can modulate pathways with things like antibodies if they're upregulated and prohibitive, or with injecting, secreted proteins that are agonistic to help restore and enhance things like hippocampal neurogenesis and cognitive function in the brain, or literally enhance muscle regeneration where you get less fibrosis. And then these experiments around function, you get stronger grip strength, you get, greater endurance on treadmill performance, you get literally greater aurora force measurements. So, we really established that as a good model to understand protein signaling. And then where the Secretome came in was actually another project that we began working on during my third year of grad school, where we were like, okay, we know that there are secreted proteins that can modulate these protein signaling pathways that are dysregulated. We know there's changes in proteins that happen systemically in blood circulation. We know that from the parabiosis studies, right, where young blood can help rejuvenate, aged function. And even more potently, aged blood is actually quite inhibitory. So there are circulating factors and proteins that are responsible. So we just had this simple question: can we actually take the most regenerative niche out there, which is the embryonic stem cell niche, the embryonic niche, where you take, for example, protein secreted by human embryonic stem cells, and they, as a secretome, have the capacity to signal to different cells to generate every cell in the body, to generate an entire human being. And our basically hypothesis was maybe these could actually be highly regenerative for aged and degenerating tissues. So then Irina, Mike, and I remember at the time really began doing together, all of us, experiments where we showed that we can purify subfractions of human embryonic stem cell secretomes. We proved that it was proteins and not, RNAs, nucleic acids, or exosomes that were really responsible for this behavior. And we showed that we could take those proteins, and whether we added into like an injured, muscle tissue, or even in various types of in vitro models, such as, for example, an Alzheimer's disease model where we take, immature human cortical neurons, and in the face of A beta, they're apoptosing. We were able to show in models like that we could actually promote survival and prevent cell death. We would show in the aged context that we can enhance muscle regeneration, myogenesis, and repair muscle and prevent fibrosis, right? And then what we did when we launched Juvena, my co-founder and I, my co-founder Jeremy, who's a quantitative proteomics and machine learning expert, who I just had the incredible serendipitous fortune of being introduced to in 2017 when I was a postdoc at Stanford, and really thinking about Juvena, building the model, and looking for a quantitative proteomics expert co-founder, very specific expertise. When he and I sort of, paired up, and then our first, technically our third employee, because I was the first employee, Jeremy, my co-founder, was the second. Our third employee, Tack, who had just spent, also 6 years in Helen Blau's lab at Stanford. The three of us basically in 2018 paired up. And one of the first things, we did was continue to really study these secretomes and identify them to build our first generation library at Juvena. So then at Juvena, we also showed that we can enhance, for example, cartilage regeneration if we look at and took chondrocyte precursors isolated from human osteoarthritic knees. And we really built and decided to focus on muscle as one of the first sort of indications in therapeutic areas, where we said, let's build this platform. Let's begin building this, in silico and compounding database of regenerative protein biology, linking different proteins in stem cell secretomes to diseases. But let's have an ultra focus on muscle in order to identify and engineer candidates that can potentially treat the largest indication out there that is such a good hallmark of aging, that really manifests as aging, which is the disease of sarcopenia, right? Age-related muscle wasting and frailty, where also the thought was if we can target muscle, we can actually, and rejuvenate muscle, we could potentially, truly promote health span and target multiple organ systems and multiple comorbidities. I'll stop there because it's a lot of information.
No. I mean, I have like a dozen questions after that. You mentioned you're a runner, and I'm a lifelong athlete myself. And here at the Buck, we're also really interested in how important muscle is, because muscle releases all of these good things, and exercise also, helps brain, helps heart. Like if you can keep good muscle function, then you really open up the door to keep many, many other systems of the body healthy. So I definitely agree, or very much agree, and love your approach.
Thank you.
So, I mean, it sounds like, again, to try and just distill down, you have iPS stem cells, and you measure the things that those stem cells release. There are thousands and thousands of things that these stem cells release, and you're trying to figure out what's in the stem cell soup, and then what can we use it for to target other tissues in the body.
Exactly. And then identify those proteins, validate them, and then actually engineer them as biologics that can fuel a pipeline of tissue restorative therapies for different types of diseases.
It's using what nature's already doing. These stem cells are already releasing all of this good stuff, but kind of, so leveraging natural biology. And then, as you said, if there's something that you could tweak and improve using AI, then maybe it's more potent, activating these beneficial rejuvenation pathways in the body. Yeah. Before we talk about muscle more, I feel like the idea of rejuvenation in the past has been kind of like sci-fi, like growing extra limbs, or, I know people are working now to regrow whole organs, right? Regrow livers, and there's obviously like organ shortages, and there's lots of reasons why that would be good. I mean, what's the most common question you get about rejuvenation? Are people afraid of the idea of rejuvenation at all? Or, say a bit more about that, because I feel like it's a semi-sci-fi topic.
I think there's, varying reactions based on, how open people are and where they're also at in their lives. Like, I would say in terms of rejuvenation, there's already a lot of that, buy-in and adoption in, for example, like the cosmetic, space, right? Like, women and men, right, get older. They want to get, men, maybe sometimes even want hair transplants, right? Botox to, prevent wrinkles, right? Skin creams, different serums, things. So I'd actually say that there's always been, right? And it's actually such a, lucrative industry in the beauty industry, such a passion for, keeping your skin young, looking more youthful, being young longer, rejuvenating your hair, your skin, this and that, where I actually think now we're just kind of, giving that a whole new level, right? Now, instead of it just being not scientifically proven, here are scientifically proven approaches, and, we can, think about things externally, but we're also looking internally. And when it comes to muscle, I think there's actually more of an appreciation for protein-based therapies and muscle because of this also increasing, fad, right? And kind of cultural shift towards, people really appreciating actually, body composition, muscle health. There's definitely, the passionate athletes, but also the folks that just want to go to the gym, right? And keep their muscle, their health longer. And so I find people actually to be quite open for the most part, at least on Juvena's approach, but sometimes there is, there's a lot of snake oil out there, right? So then there's sometimes the skepticism if you're someone that's, obsessed with wanting to find aging remedies and getting disappointed that there's not that much out there that really actually works today. So that's what I mean by sort of different kind of mixed signals, depending on sort of what angle you're coming at it. And
yeah, I think that the same sentiment applies into a lot of people who work in aging or anti-aging research. And I feel like if you call it anti-aging, you get more lumped in with, snake oil people. So there's an interesting just like uses of language in the space around how people perceive you. And I think it's a challenge across science right now to do science communication effectively so that people, know where to get good information and can sort of sort out the snake oil from the real science. But that's why we do things like this podcast.
Agreed.
So let's talk a bit more about muscle. Another reason why now is such a great moment to be thinking about muscle and aging is that we have this big, new, slightly uncontrolled experiment with GLP-1s and weight loss drugs, which I think are great for a whole load of reasons. And controlling the obesity epidemic in the US is obviously super important for people who can't go and run marathons, perhaps, like myself. But there's questions around how these drugs affect muscle mass. And I know this is something that you've been thinking about a lot. So perhaps give a bit more context why you think this is important and how you're all addressing it at Juvena.
Yeah, Brianna, great question. I'm glad, we turned to this topic. I'd say, first, when we had the excitement and advent around the GLP-1, GIP agonists, these incretin treatments that have really, changed the game, right, in the last few years, there's actually been first and foremost, there's been this positive shift where it's one of the first times ever, that the public is actually seeing you can treat, metabolic diseases potentially. You can treat unhealthy aging. You can actually develop, medicines that are applicable to a huge swath of society in a way that makes people feel better, have better, rejuvenated metabolisms, and actually ultimately treat multiple potential comorbidities. You get better liver function. It's now, being potentially used for fatty liver, diabetes, for all sorts of ailments, right? So
it feels like every week there's a new thing that these drugs are potentially going to do for us, right?
And on the positive, this has actually really opened the doors for companies like Juvena and many others that have, really, we were kind of ahead of the game in the sense that we believed in the ability of these type of therapies to be game-changing.
It's because we're treating aging, right?
Exactly.
We're looking at the fundamental biology that underpins changes across the whole body.
So I would say that this, success has been ultimately positive because then it's caused companies like Lilly, Novo, and many others now to start wanting to actually look at other chronic diseases, that previously there's still zero FDA approved things on the market. And so they're opening their eyes more, and it's turned a huge focus and growing interest now in the area of targeting muscle for improved muscle health, improved body composition, improved weight loss quality. Because as you alluded to, Brianna, there is, evidence that, again, so to this day, it's, contradictory. There needs to be more studies. Also, we're in, like you said, this big giant experiment of actually people being now for years on the incretin. So we actually need to be looking carefully and really taking those measurements. But there is ultimately, it's well known now that when you lose weight through a starvation-induced mechanism where you're reducing caloric intake, you're going to have that weight's not going to just be fat, right? You're also going to get muscle loss. There is, maybe evidence that the incretins themselves are causing accelerated muscle loss, but that's not, 100% confirmed.
It depends on the drug as well, because there's new variants that, or combinations perhaps that will mitigate that.
Exactly. But ultimately it has then turned the attention to the need to ideally not only have folks, lose fat and improve metabolism, but actually have unique approaches where they're doing so in a way that preserves muscle mass, so that if there's weight regain and weight loss, you don't start, changing body composition drastically, where unfortunately it's quick. The body's really quick to lose. Like, you start eating less, you're going to start losing muscle, right? And drastically sometimes. But then when you gain the weight back, if let's say you get off incretins and you start, ingesting those calories again, the fat is the quickest to come back. So if you do rounds of this, that's when, that's where I think we'll start to see over the next few years if that truly will have a detrimental impact in terms of people's quality of life in the long term. And so I think there is a growing need and appreciation to treat muscles so that you can take these therapies, go on and off, and have durable weight loss, as well as improved, metabolism of your muscle and function of your muscle, because that retention of muscle is also, as we know, especially Juvena knows, crucial, right, to long-term lifespan, and preventing and ameliorating a lot of comorbidities. So that's I'd say is that we're so thrilled that a lot of companies have, are more and more appreciating, Juvena's, world-class now expertise we've built in over 8 years in this area. And we're so excited to now actually be partnered with Lilly to actually identify more types of stem cell secreted proteins that can modulate muscle health and muscle metabolism in order to prevent muscle atrophy and maybe even induce hypertrophy in the context, of incretin treatments, even potentially as standalone, therapies. And so I think there's, that's really exciting, and in an area that is an unmet need that hopefully Juvena will be able to solve in partnership with some of the leaders in the space.
Yeah, that's such an exciting opportunity. So when do we expect to see it hit the shelves? Where are you at with your development pipeline?
So our most advanced asset is a fusion protein. It's the first drug that's come out of the platform, and that is taking the lead in the pipeline, that's currently in phase 1 studies. Wow. It's a fusion protein that is derived from human IGF-2, insulin-like growth factor 2, which we discovered is one of a potent ingredient in human embryonic stem cell secretomes that is well known to drive muscle development. And we really showed is quite potent in enhancing muscle regeneration and repair, and improving survival plus metabolism and glycolytic activity, even of existing fibers in the context of degenerative diseases such as myotonic dystrophy type 1, the first disease indication we're developing it towards, but also even larger indications like age-related muscle wasting and other types of atrophy-related indications. So with that, we've engineered it to be a fusion where it's subcutaneously administered, just like insulin for diabetes is, but this is now our insulin for muscle. But instead of it being daily, we're seeing we think it's going to be weekly, and that's what we're testing based on the PK studies in primates and humanized mice, and now literally in people, and the results we're getting. So we're in phase 1 SAD and MAD in healthy volunteers, and we're planning 2 kind of early POC studies, one in an atrophy model with people that will be in a cast where, it's crazy actually how quickly you lose muscle mass. I don't know if you've ever broke a bone, but I broke my ankle once, and that was in 2018, and to this day, my right leg is skinnier than my left. Like, you lose that mass so quickly. So it'll be a great kind of model to see if we can actually prevent that loss of mass in an acute fashion, the improvement of strength and preservation. And then we'll also go into a small population of people living with myotonic dystrophy type 1 that are really suffering from muscle wasting. And we'll have hopefully that data in the year to come. So
Wow. Super exciting time of growth for you all. And I got to say, I do really love the limb immobilization casting as a model, because it's a great way to get an IRB to agree to something that's going to cause that much muscle loss that quickly. Although apparently you can't do those studies in older people because it's so hard to be able to retrain them.
Exactly.
It's always in young people. So super interesting model. But so in limb immobilization, in some small disease populations, but in 5, 10, 15 years, do you think that you're going to hit 50, you're going to go to the doctor, and you're going to start to see you're losing muscle, and everyone starts going on this in the same way that so many people are on statins?
Literally, right? That's exactly what I predict, if of course we can, get through the early hurdles of clinical development, prove the mechanism of action, show the potential to rejuvenate muscle in a clinical human population setting. I think, what we really envision for a drug like JUV-161 is it truly is in our minds like an insulin for muscle, where it enhances muscle insulin sensitivity, ultimately leading to better blood glucose regulation as well. It improves metabolism, the energetics, the function of and quality of the muscle. It promotes new muscle formation. I predict it would be something that could actually work for, I would love to take it in my 50s. When I get to 50, I would love to take JUV-161 if it was on the market and available. It's that type of drug that I think everyone's going to want because of the way it makes you feel and the way it basically tackles one of the key pathways that is down-regulated in a lot of people as we get older, and in dystrophies and a lot of muscle diseases, which is AKT signaling, right? So if we can modestly restore that, elevate it in a way that's, controlled, dose-dependent, safe, and we are very safe, with this drug within, the dose we're using and everything, that can actually restore homeostasis in many ways, or get us towards that muscle homeostatic restoration that leads to better health.
As you're talking, I'm almost, has anyone ever sort of suggested, or did you ever think about suggesting that this drug could be like an exercise mimetic? Because, I think, and that's a whole other hot button topic, whether one can mimic all of the effects of exercise with the drug, but you're talking about insulin sensitivity and glucose control. And it's so, Have you thought about that? And why did you decide not to position it like that?
With exercise, just like you said, right, it's going to be a complex system where there's so many, exokines, myokines being secreted, being modulated. IGF-2 and other types of growth factors and hormones as well are definitely upregulated and stimulated in these contexts. And, in many ways, actually, our collaboration with Lilly is also looking at other types of factors that can modulate muscle metabolism, energy expenditure potential, these type of mechanisms that are associated with exercise. So I do feel like that is where, we're headed towards identifying things that can promote muscle in a way that, some people, it's not their fault, right? They, might be, mobilized, have just had a surgery, already be at that point of frailty where it's hard to get those steps in. So if we can actually mimic, that's going to be game changing. And I do feel like we're headed there. But I wouldn't go so far as to say that IGF-2, HSA, like our JUV-161 candidate, is an exercise mimicker. We haven't proven that. So, I wouldn't want to make that claim. I'm a very data-driven person.
It'd also be very interesting and, to do studies where you pair exercise training with drugs like this to see if there could be like a synergistic effect. So many cool questions that we can answer, but also so many lives that this is going to impact. So you said, you hope that, in your 50s, you'd be able to, take a drug that you helped create. And I think there's something really special when someone worked on something in their PhD and postdoc and has now built a company out of it. Like your story is like hugely inspiring. So I really hope that you have the chance to be taking your own drug to protect your muscle mass in the future, because that would just be, they should make a movie about that. It's very cool. So thank you very much for your time.
I can't wait to get there.
Yeah. And very good luck with everything going on with Juvena for the next few years.
I really appreciate that, Brianna. Good luck too. And thank you for the opportunity to share my story, share more about Juvena, and look forward to connecting and seeing you at the next conference.
Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe, share, and give us a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We're Not Getting Any Younger Yet is produced by Vital Mind Media. The Buck Institute's very own Robin Snyder is the executive producer. Wellington Bowler is right next to us here directing the recordings, and the esteemed Sharif Azad weaves the show together for you.
If you're listening to this podcast, you know that there has never been a more exciting time in research on aging. Discoveries in the labs are moving into the clinic to help us all live better longer. The Buck Institute depends on the support of people like you to carry on our breakthrough research. Please visit us at buckinstitute.org to learn more and to donate. This episode was sponsored by Ashton Thomas Private Wealth, where discipline shapes vision and vision builds legacy. Learn more at ashtonthomaspw.com.
Investment advisory services are provided by Ashton Thomas Private Wealth, LLC, and Ashton Thomas Securities, LLC, SEC-registered investment advisors. Securities are offered through Ashton Thomas Securities, LLC, a registered broker-dealer and member of FINRA SIPC.
There has always been such a passion for, keeping your skin young, looking more youthful, being young longer, rejuvenating your hair, your skin, this and that, where I actually think now we're just kind of, giving that a whole new level, right? Now, instead of it just being not scientifically proven, here are scientifically proven approaches. When it comes to muscle, I think there's actually more of an appreciation for protein-based therapies and muscle because of this also increasing cultural shift towards, people really appreciating body composition, muscle health, but there's a lot of snake oil out there. There's definitely, the passionate athletes, but also the folks that just want to go to the gym, right? And keep their muscle, their health longer. And so I find people actually to be quite open for the most part, at least on Juvena's approach, but if you're someone that's, obsessed with wanting to find aging remedies and getting disappointed that there's not that much out there that really actually works today,